Hello and welcome back to another episode of Critical Reactions with your host, Bryan. We're going to check out a special selection today, which is where one of you tell me exactly what it is I need to check out. Today's comes at us from PM Grumps. Hello again. This time I'd like to appreciate you taking a listen to Joie, des étoiles? Section 5 of Olivier Messiaen's Turangalîla-Symphony from 1948, featuring Joie, chaos, piano shredding, and Ondes Martinot. I had to look up that last one. Not too sure what that is. It's some old school quasi-electronic musical instruments. So this is going to be pretty interesting. Messiaen is definitely more exploratory in the world of classical writing, and seeing that he's working with some of these earliest forms of electronic musical instruments doesn't really surprise me. Let's dive into this though and check out this fifth movement. See what Olivier is up to today. There's certainly a theme, at least a rhythmic one. Lots of short staccato movement, explosive ideas too. Was that the Ondes Martinot? It kind of sounds like a theremin, but it certainly isn't a traditional orchestral instrument. There's so much chaos, and then there's just this very uplifting theme that's persistent throughout. lot of cyclical momentum in this. Those hockets kill me every time, man. The strings and the piano just dancing around each other. Whoa. What a wild finale. Like, legitimately. This is a track that is fairly focused around chaos, movements. Controlled chaos probably would be a better description of it. It is a lot all of the time from everyone. I think even when you look at individual parts, you're going to find a lot of complexity in them, a lot of speed and movement, but the song certainly has all these parts of the orchestra rapidly dancing around each other. It is densely layered, incredibly complex, rhythmically, but also harmonically too. There's a lot of melodic device going on in here, and there's also variations on themes. So if you know, it's not just in the moment things are dense and layered, but it's also calling back to and building off of ideas that were present at the beginning of the movement. It is complex even on a temporal element of the compositional side, seeing how everything relates across the 6 minutes of music, give or take. But then to move from all of that into this unified chord of awe, of wonder, that was fairly impactful. All of this noise concentrated to an idea. That's not to say that the scattered, wildly layered parts at the beginning of this, or for a majority of this movement, weren't focusing on ideas, but the idea was complexity. It was lots of small moving ideas. And here it's more focused, the entire orchestra coming together to deliver a single sound. And for that to evolve into reverence, to be small against something larger, to be in the presence of something bigger than life. Then for the third chord to introduce such darkness and tension. To flip between these three rapidly. Joy, inspiration, vastness, reverence, darkness, fear, danger. To move between these so rapidly and then to end on this just massive, harmonized, stable chord. I don't know if I'd necessarily call it resolved, primarily because the harmonic information of this track is almost too dense for me. I get fleeting feelings here and there, but it's not like I really understood a harmonic movement, a chordal progression throughout this track where any specific chord is going to feel like a return to home or a resolution or a calm after tension. But even in the final chords, I wouldn't say that the last one evoked resolve. But it did evoke a feeling of whole, as if something were missing prior and is now filled in. I find that really interesting after bouncing back and forth between reverence, awe, vastness, joy, fear, danger, to then finally feel complete at the end. And it left me speechless for a moment. Partially because, 5.5 minutes into this track, the song's done one thing really well. That one thing is it has a lot of moving parts to it, and there is certainly a few topics I wanted to touch on, but I was like, okay, I get this song. I see what it's doing. I see what it's going for. We're going to talk about some of the complexity elements. It's going to be a good video for like music education. We're going to touch on some compositional techniques. People might learn some stuff about this track. And then the ending hits, and it just completely blows everything out of the water. And I'm just like, what is this? It's not what I was expecting. It's subversive in a lot of ways, but it feels right too. It isn't experimental. It isn't avant-garde in any way. It isn't a drastic shift into the new for contrast or shock value. It fits. Why does it fit? I'm still not entirely sure about that. Maybe by the time we talk through this, I might come to some conclusion, but as of right now, it's just one of those things that works. And I don't have the vocabulary or even the understanding at the moment to get it. It's just something I feel in my gut. Wonderful ending. The rest of the track is equally exciting, but for a variety of different reasons. One, as I talked about, was sort of theme and variation, theme and expansion. I don't know if I'd go as far to call this a fugue, but it certainly does find ways to develop a core motif across the entirety of its runtime. In fact, now that I say that, I wonder if, because like I said, some of the harmonic information got lost on me through all of the melodic and rhythmic complexity in this track. It's kind of tough to keep track of the harmonic information when so much of everything else is being thrown at me. But I am curious if the ending of this track is based off of the harmonic properties of the rest of this. Definitely something to think about for a future listen. But right from the start, we have this idea of a passing of the baton. One instrument plays a little 2-beat lick, then another instrument plays it, another instrument plays it, another instrument plays it, and it kind of gets passed down the line. There are small changes. Sometimes the pitches will be different. I think for the most part, the intervals are the same, which registers it as the same ostinato, but it is shifting mode, possibly, maybe chord, applying the same intervals within the chord, the same steps of the chord, but the pitches are changing as the chord changes. But there's also some sections where there's a little bit of a rhythmic mismatch, an extra note added. Maybe the third note gets held on to for a little longer. Small little variations. This is what I would say a majority of this track is made up of. The call and response and response and response of an ostinato, where the call and response kind of creates a bit of an echo, a canon. Usually when we think of call and response, it is one idea followed by another. But here it is one idea followed by a variation of that idea, followed by a variation of that idea. It's interesting to listen to because at the start of the track, it's fairly easy to follow along with the responses and to see where they don't deviate and where they do. But by the time we have 2 layers of the responses going, 2 different calls and 2 different responses, and then even 3, I believe, further into the track, it's just too many layers to keep track of, and some of the melodies start to blend together. The ostinatos start to feel like they're combined. Can't really tell which ones are from one call and which are from a different call. In a lot of ways, and I don't bring this up intentionally because I'm only half sure about this, but isn't Olivier also one of the composers that we checked out that wrote a Renaissance classical piece around the concept of bird song or bird chirping? I remember listening to this track, but I only like 50% confident that Messiaen was the one who composed that. But this song does feel like bird song in particular, but several different species of bird all communicating at the same time. It can sound musical-ish, but it's also the chaos. It's the cacophony of all of these different ideas. I live in a place where the birds are fairly loud. I can hear them from even inside of the house, and there's quite a few different species of bird. And usually, early afternoon-ish, and early morning too, but they kind of take a rest later in the morning, and then they come back after lunchtime for some reason. Just lots of different bird songs outside my window. And it does remind me of this, or maybe this reminds me of that. I find that to be really interesting, as if there's a lot of ideas being thrown at me, and if I could hear any one of them specifically, it would make sense, but because I'm hearing so many simultaneously, it's difficult to parse one from another. My brain is getting overloaded by all of the information. And then, of course, as I mentioned, ideas get repeated, which in a sense kind of muddies the idea too. Much like reverb or delay can make one idea kind of get muddied as it's repeated over and over against everything else that's happening. I don't know where I was going with that. I had an idea in mind. That's frustrating. Anyways, though, there's a lot going on here, and I think it's gorgeous when I listen to it. But it's really tough to parse all of it individually. That's just from like the compositional side, though. What I think is equally important is instrument choice or timbre. the coloring, the sound of the instrument that performs it. We have some brass in here. We have some woodwind. We have some strings. I mean, we have an orchestra. There's a timpani in here. There's percussion. But what I think is most important is what is on the higher end of things. We have some very bright, higher pitched metal bells in here, and they add a specific twinkling to this track. When I think of the chaos of the noise and eventually the reverence of feeling small against something so much larger than life, I remember these bells, how star-like they felt. There was one section, I wish I could point to a specific timestamp for this. I would say 2 to 3 minutes into the track, certainly around the midpoint, but I think in the first half of the track, not the second half. We had the consistent idea of call and response and response and response and multiple layers of that. There's a lot of movement between these instruments, and they're all staccato. Lots of short notes being played rapid fire right next to each other. That's another thing that kind of adds into this star-like feeling. There's just not a lot of long held out notes. It's all very short and abrupt. Except for one instrument, we'll get to that in a second. But while all these instruments are bouncing around, the pitches themselves are changing as there's modal or chordal shifts to align with. There's this metal bell, some sort of glockenspiel off on the left that is just hard locked into one idea. It's 8 notes. I get a general descending feel from it, but it's kind of bouncing all over the place. I think if we kind of captured the, I don't know, like the median movements of all of these notes, it would have a slightly downward shape to it, but overall, each individual note just kind of randomly decides to raise or lower in pitch. But it's 8 notes that just stay the same, unlike the rest of the instruments, which feel like they take this one idea and then raise it or lower it in step. Every note is the same interval from the previous one. It's just the first note is different to follow along with, again, whatever chord changes or modal changes we might be experiencing, so that it's not clashing with the harmonic element of the track. The bells aren't concerned with that at all. We're not looking at a consistent interval movement. We're looking at the same exact pitches played over and over and over. It is one for one identical. The rest of the orchestra is shifting, the bells are not. This really stood out to me. And I wish I knew why at the time. I'm still not entirely sure. I think just the sheer fact that it is kind of stationary in this ever-changing and moving track, just to hear anything kind of static at all is interesting. But it is coming from the brightest, pluckiest, most metallic, it's a very tinny sound against everything else, instrument. It is this twinkling, this sparkling in the song. A bit harsh, maybe, I think, from my perspective on the production of it, but still, it's so far divorced from the warmth that everything else brings to the table. It really made me think of stars in a way that I couldn't place until we hit those final chords, and I felt that same reverence in the music as I do to space in general. It's always looking up at stars on a clear night that I can feel just how small humanity is, but how beautiful that is too, how meaningful we are within our small space and the vastness of everything out there. And the beauty of just looking at the stars too. It's a lot of mixed emotions. It really is. And I kind of get that here. I don't know what else to add to it, but there's import to that. The rest of the instruments, it's an orchestra. I don't really hear any instruments here that really stand out to me. Again, everything else kind of focuses on warmth, but there's just like glockenspiel off in the corner that stands out to me in the couple of times it's used. There is one other instrument, though, what to me still sounds like a theremin, and if PM Grumps hadn't have mentioned anything, I probably would have called a theremin this entire video, but it is the Ondes Martinot. It's very interesting. Apparently this instrument was invented in 1928. I just happen to have the Wikipedia page here. As like I said, I had never heard of this before, and I didn't know if this was a person or an instrument or a technique. It was just, this song has Ondes Martinot in it, and I'm like, well, that's cool. What's that? So anyways, it's a French instrument, 1928, and it is described as an early electronic musical instrument. And yeah, it kind of sounds like a theremin. Actually, I say kind of, it does. It sounds a lot like a theremin. I'm kind of curious about things because the theremin ends up a few decades later, maybe a couple decades later, very closely tied into sci-fi sound. The theremin to me will always be, well, actually, it like can't be horror. Also, like to use the theremin as well, like 50s can't be horror stuff, but sci-fi too. This though feels like space, both the emotional element, but also the sonic elements of stars, of vastness, of reverence, of danger. This is space exploration to me. I don't know if that's necessarily what Olivier had in mind when he composed this, but it is what I hear, and I think that the theremin adds, that the Ondes Martinot adds to that. Maybe retroactively, maybe not necessarily at the time, but certainly today, me as someone alive in 2026, having been influenced by the theremin's use in science fiction music or theme songs for science fiction media, hearing the theremin paired to these ideas, often it creates that connection in the pop culture realm. And I hear it now in Olivier's music. I'm really curious if Olivier's ever talked about his inspiration for this work. I mean, obviously, this is one movement of 6, I think. So it's possible that the other movements aren't exploring this theme, and maybe I'm just focusing too narrowly just on this one movement here. But the theremin, the bells, they all come to the Ondes Martinot. It sounds so much like a theremin to me. It all comes together to create a very space exploration vibe. Or maybe just the wonders of space. That could be true as well. I gotta look up when this was written too. I'm assuming it was a bit on the older side, but I also don't know. Olivier Messiaen is modern classical composer. I think still alive too. So, a lot of this could be in tandem with or even after the science fiction theremin craze as well. I don't know. It's what I get out of it, though. On the other compositional side, we've already talked about call and response, but we also have, counterpoint. Lots of that in here. There's also hockets. Counterpoint is dual melodies, dual simultaneous melodies, 2 instruments playing their own melodies that might interact with each other in some way, but they aren't just playing the same thing. Hockets are multiple instruments playing pieces of a melody. For instance, if I sung do 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 do, that's just one person singing one melody. But if I said do, and someone else went do do do, and someone else goes do do do, now we have a hocket. It is the one melody split up into chunks and given to different instruments. And this is interesting because it comes across in a multitude of ways. First of all, we do have the call and response, which at times the responses are different ideas, not an echo of the first idea. These come across as very hockety. Especially when we have the highs versus the lows, flutes versus the tubas, violins versus the cellos. I always find this to be really comical because not only do we have this melody being played between multiple instruments, but it's also quickly rapid fire moving between them, and the instruments really couldn't be any further as far as difference goes. We're also looking at massive pitch leaps too, which is just, to me, kind of comical. Anything over an octave, and it's just kind of absurd to be jumping between these notes so rapidly. And that happens quite a bit in this track. So we have these two melodic devices that are present. Then we also have the pure dynamics on this track. We already talked about the pitch dynamics jumping between these, but we have volume dynamics. We have these massive swells, where the volume will come up a little bit and then come back down a little bit and back up a little bit and then back down a little bit. These are fun. They're all over the place. Movement, even in general. As I mentioned, a lot of these lines kind of bounce around between notes wildly, but there is a general movement within them too. Like if you look at all of the notes, while each one is kind of a random jump, you can find that they are generally moving upwards or downwards in pitch. And to me, mixed with the swells, the rising and decreasing of volume, we can also feel the rising and decreasing of pitch. Sometimes in line with the volume, but sometimes inverse as well, where we rise in volume and decrease in pitch, and then decrease in volume but rise in pitch. It's really interesting. It all comes across as, well, random and chaotic. There's a lot of intentionality to all of this, but from a first-time listen, it is way too dense to pick up on these patterns. But I think that's kind of the point, too. I mean, going back to this whole space thing, space is chaos. But it's chaos that creates things. Maybe not intentionally, but it does happen. Look at the sheer concept of the Big Bang. Look at how this entire solar system was created, how life began on Earth. Not directed by some guiding hand, but through a series of seemingly random events that all led to something beautiful, life. I see that same thing here. Of course, it is all guided by a hand. We have the composer who is hand selecting all of these notes and creating this, but the feeling behind it all is chaotic. It's random. It's, where's the song going to go next? It's interesting to see how many patterns are in this track, though. At the beginning, I was more capable of kind of anticipating where things were going. We kind of had this 2 bars of this idea, this back and forth, and then this idea is going to have a back and forth with this idea, and they're going to go back and forth. So we have do 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 do, and so we kind of have like these layers of calls and responses going on in this track. Probably about 2.5 minutes in, though, it just becomes too complex for me to pick up. And there were a few places where there was some time feel shifts as well that kind of threw me off, some temporal rhythmic devices that threw me off. A lot of this is based around 2 beats or 2 bar patterns. It's both of them simultaneously happening. And then eventually we would shift to like 3-3-2, which would give us 8 beats. It's 2 bars, but it's not broken up symmetrically like a vast majority of this track is, and I found it difficult to begin to anticipate where Olivier was taking us. I found that to be interesting too. It, even in places where I thought I found patterns, those patterns dissipate, they change, they evolve. It becomes seemingly, again, chaotic, even in the places I understand. This is a song that is not chaotic. Everything is hand-picked. There is a reason for everything. Otherwise, it would fall apart, and it doesn't. It never even gets close to falling apart. But I love how right from the start, it feels like something I could get, and then slowly I watch it slip through my fingertips as I realize how dense it can become. And this kind of also lines up with space. To look up at the stars, that seems pretty easy. To become an astronaut, to get into low orbit or just outside the Earth, that's difficult. Yeah, I'm not trying to downplay that, but that seems possible too. But to understand how big the universe is, the more you look into it, the more there is. We have this half of the solar system, the few planets that sit closest to the sun. Then everything out is just so far away. And then there's other universes and galaxies. Stuff that takes years to travel to at high speeds. What seems simple to digest becomes impossible to comprehend. And the song evolves in that same way, where the deeper you get into it, the more wild it becomes. And at least for me, I think that's beautiful. I want to look up when this came out. I suppose I should look up a translation of the movement name. There's no lyrics to this, so I don't think there's going to be much more to the video, but, you know, I got to end with a little bit of research, I suppose. All right. Just a couple of real quick things. Nothing that really is going to add too much, but cool little tidbits, knowledge to have. The Ondes Martinot actually came out after the theremin. It was invented in 1928, and the theremin was actually patented in 1928, developed in 1920. So the theremin had been out almost a decade before the Ondes Martinot was created. So the fact that they sound so similar in timbre and even execution too, that was one other thing I noticed in this track, is that the Ondes Martinot was consistently used to play microtonality, really gradual, smooth shifts between pitches. We had a low pitch, we didn't really get melodies out of it. A pitch, massive rise up in pitch, and then massive drop back down to that original one. I'm curious, there's a few pictures here, and the theremin eventually had a keyboard added to it, so I'm curious if this version just didn't, if this was an original version where it was more difficult to get different pitches on or something. I'm not sure, but it seemed to be very limited in what it's and how it participated in this track. The other thing I learned, though, is that, as was introduced to me at the beginning of this, this track came out in 1948. So certainly after the theremin was created, but also slightly before, I believe. Y'all can let me know about this, because my perception is that the theremin became associated with science fiction music or theme songs to science fiction media in the 50s. If it predates that, I mean, it kind of complicates things. I'm just kind of curious what might have influenced what. Now this entire space stars thing is actually upheld a little bit. I went and found the translation for the title, and it is Joy of the Blood of the Stars. The blood of the stars is interesting. Stars don't have blood, but could also be an interpretation of it could be the positive ideas of what comes out of stars. When they supernova, that energy is put back into the universe. It helps other stars become. Not necessarily a literal blood, but the death of, to give back to. to release what makes you alive and to put that back into the universe. So while not, I think, directly related to my understanding of this track, it still captures this concept of stars, but does work well within the emotions I felt at the end of the track too. I think a lot of those feelings that I got, especially from those final chords and how they related to the rest of the track, is kind of embodied in this concept of not necessarily rebirth, but birth through death. And how universal that concept is. These are my thoughts. Oh, dang, I have to pronounce this again. I'm just going to say Olivier Messiaen's Turangalîla-Symphony Movement 5. Let me know what you thought of this track. I'm just going to omit the movement name. I'm getting better at my French, but it's tough, man. Let me know what you thought of this. If there's anything that stood out to you, anything that you would like to add on to what I said or correct me on. Do you have your own perspective or opinion on this track, your own take on it? Let me know. Put all of that and anything else you'd like to add into the comment section below. Above that, in the description box, is a link to Linktree. It takes you here. You can find links to my music, ways to support the channel, a link to the Discord server, and so much more. Above that, if you could, like, subscribe, and ring the bell. I greatly appreciate all three of those. That wraps it up for today, but I'll be back tomorrow at 5 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, 9 p.m. UTC as usual. Until next time, remember to be critical, not cynical of the music you listen to, and have a fantastic morning, afternoon, or evening, whenever you choose to watch my videos.